The Capitol was tense, the kind of tension that usually precedes political earthquakes. The House Oversight Committee hearing room was packed beyond capacity, journalists elbowed for position, aides whispered anxiously, and even veteran representatives leaned forward with a rare sense of anticipation. Jasmine Crockett, the Democratic congresswoman from Texas, sat at her place at the long mahogany table, composed, confident, and utterly unbothered by the looming presence at the witness stand. That presence was none other than Mike Pompeo, former Secretary of State, former CIA Director, and longtime Republican heavyweight. Known for his evasive manner and stone-faced testimony, Pompeo had dodged questions at dozens of hearings. But something was different today. There was a quiet undercurrent in the air, a sense that something had shifted. The look in Crockett's eyes wasn't just focused, it was surgical. The hearing had been billed as a review of foreign lobbying and private sector influence on U.S. diplomatic decisions. On the surface, the subject was dry, but those who knew Crockett understood that if she had chosen to sit through the hearing, it was because she had come armed. Pompeo leaned toward his mic, offering one of his patented smirks. Congresswoman Crockett, while I appreciate your line of inquiry, I think you're grasping at shadows. There's no evidence that anything untoward occurred during my tenure. You're fishing, respectfully. Crockett didn't flinch. She allowed the silence to stretch just long enough for the smirk to settle on his face. Then she spoke. With all due respect, Mr. Pompeo, maybe you forgot this one. She reached into her folder and slowly, deliberately pulled out a printed email. Her fingertips tapped it against the microphone to draw attention. Heads in the gallery turned. Cameras zoomed in. This is an email dated October 9, 2020, she said, her voice cool and composed. Sent from your private server, yes, your private server, to a Mr. Gerald Stackhouse of Halberd Global, a contractor that mysteriously received a $200 million contract just weeks after your meeting in Bratislava. Pompeo's eyes narrowed slightly. He didn't speak. Crockett continued, unbothered by his silence. You used your personal email account. That's strike one. You contacted a private defense contractor while serving as Secretary of State. Strike two, and this is the best part. She turned the page and read aloud. We'll fast-track this if you grease the right gears. The room exploded in whispers. Gasps, stunned expressions, even a cough from one of the Republican aides. The committee chair banged the gavel furiously, demanding order, but the damage was done. No one had expected it, not even Pompeo. Do you deny sending this? She asked pointedly. Pompeo leaned forward, his voice slightly strained. I don't recall that correspondence. You don't recall this email, she said, holding it up again. Because I have the full thread. I have the metadata, and I have an independently verified cyberforensics report confirming its origin, timestamp, and routing path. You want to talk about shadows? I'm shining a spotlight, Mr. Secretary. He tried to recover. That line could have been taken out of context. Crockett cut in sharply. You mean the line where you also wrote, and I quote, keep this away from official channels. Or the one where you said, we'll finalize once our friends in Tel Aviv give the nod. The gasps turned into stunned silence. Even Republican members of the committee looked rattled. Crockett kept her gaze fixed, calm as a sniper lining up her shot. This isn't just about backdoor diplomacy, she added. This is about the misuse of federal office to steer contracts to favored corporations, to line pockets, and to hide it all under the cloak of national security. You didn't just violate protocol. You undermined trust. Pompeo didn't respond. For once, the man known for his slick rhetorical escapes had nothing to say. Crockett leaned back slightly, letting the silence speak for her. She had done what few had managed to do, strip away the protective armor of political power and expose what lay beneath. And it was only part one of what she had planned. The media frenzy was already erupting as phones buzzed across the room. Reporters were texting out headlines before the hearing had even adjourned. Jasmine Crockett hadn't just questioned a witness. She had delivered a detonation. The fallout was instant, explosive, and merciless. Within an hour of Jasmine Crockett's stunning reveal during the Oversight Committee hearing, every major news outlet across the nation had broken into regular programming. CNN, MSNBC, even Fox News, each of them played the clip of her calmly holding up the email, reading out Mike Pompeo's incriminating words. We'll fast-track this if you grease the right gears. Hashtag Pompeo Emailgate was the top trending hashtag on social media. Millions of users were dissecting the email word by word, turning Crockett into an overnight symbol of fearlessness and accountability. Political analysts flooded the airwaves, stunned. Even those who often critiqued her for being too aggressive or too theatrical were now praising her meticulous strategy and unshakable delivery. This wasn't a stunt, it was a checkmate. Meanwhile, Pompeo's camp was in total disarray. In a rushed statement released by his office, the email was called fabricated, and he accused Crockett of political theater. But within hours, those claims collapsed. Multiple cybersecurity experts who were briefed on the content confirmed that the forensic metadata checked out. The email headers, IP routing logs, and even the internal timestamps aligned with State Department travel records from that same week in October 2020. The implications were grave. The email didn't just expose Pompeo for using private communications to conduct sensitive diplomatic deals. It suggested he was leveraging his official office for private gain, with direct benefits to a favored defense contractor. The Department of Justice, already cautious of politically charged investigations, was suddenly under immense pressure to act. By the following morning, Crockett's office confirmed she had submitted all related documents, emails, forensic reports, and whistleblower testimonies to the DOJ and the House Ethics Committee. An independent investigation was formally requested. Subpoenas were being drafted, and the whistleblowers, now that the first stone had been cast, they were ready to speak. Several former State Department staffers came forward, anonymously at first, providing even more damning context to Pompeo's actions during his tenure. One insider claimed Pompeo had maintained a shadow communication network outside government servers to coordinate deals with private actors. Another whistleblower alleged there had been more than 24 such emails with contractors in the months leading up to the 2020 election. All eyes turned to the Republican leadership. Some stood by Pompeo, calling it a smear campaign, fueled by partisan theatrics. But many others, especially those up for re-election, began to distance themselves. Behind the scenes, Republican strategists were reportedly furious. One aide, speaking anonymously to Politico, described Crockett's reveal as a surgical strike that left a hole in our bench. Pompeo, once considered a potential candidate for higher office, went silent. He cancelled all media appearances. Scheduled speeches were quietly removed from political event websites. His once confident social media activity vanished. His legal team, one of Washington's top firms, was spotted entering a closed-door meeting at the Capitol 2 days later. Crockett, meanwhile, continued to operate with the same deliberate calm. She granted no victory laps, gave no gloating interviews. When a journalist asked her how she felt about bringing down a former Secretary of State, she replied, "I didn't bring anyone down. I just brought the truth up." That quote would appear on the front page of the Washington Post the next day. But the political ramifications were just beginning. Investigations into Halberd Global were quickly launched. Its CEO, Gerald Stackhouse, was subpoenaed and seen entering a federal building under heavy security. Shareholders began pulling investments, and rumors swirled that international deals tied to Pompeo's diplomatic trips were now under audit in several countries. Crockett's actions sparked broader conversations about accountability in foreign policy and the shadowy intersections between private corporations and U.S. diplomacy. Calls for reform of the Federal Records Act resurfaced. Legislators proposed mandatory encryption logging for all government communications, and bipartisan support began to form around Crockett's push for stricter lobbying transparency. At her next Oversight Committee hearing, she entered the chamber to an unusual sight, members from both sides of the aisle seated early, watching her as she laid down her documents with quiet confidence. A few nodded to her. Others remained silent, wary now, aware that underestimating her was no longer an option. And as for the American public, Crockett's name became synonymous with something rarely seen in the nation's capital: fearless truth-telling backed by cold, irrefutable evidence. What she had done was more than a takedown. She had shifted the balance. She had reminded Washington that behind the power games, behind the rehearsed statements and polished reputations, there was still one thing that could shatter it all. The truth, and the courage to say it out loud.